Edd Smith on BBC Radio Norfolk.
My guest this morning, Dr. Phil Smith, you know him, he's from the Teacher Scientist Network, and it's all about engaging children and people in science. Good morning, Phil. How are you doing?
Good morning. Really well, thank you, Ed.
Welcome
really
along.
Well.
Now, we get excited when you get in the studio for a number of reasons, but I think normally it's because either you've got an experiment up your sleeve or you've got a bit of equipment coming into the studio so we can have a play and do a bit of science on air. And you haven't disappointed today because we are talking about
plant science.
And this, we've had you on for many years talking about all areas of science, but this is really your comfort zone, isn't it?
This is really my sort of niche area, and I suppose I'm wearing a second hat today as well. I'm the outreach officer for the British Society for Plant Pathology.
Oh, my word.
And in case you can't remember all that, Ed, I've come armed in the T-shirt.
Oh, yes.
So there you go. There's no excuse.
Do you know, honestly, as a presenter and as a producer, any guests that would just come in with a T-shirt made up with their name, their job title and what they're going to talk about would be fantastic. Well done, Phil. Extra points on that. So this is something I trailed ahead to earlier, Phil. A man is offering people the rare chance to be tree listeners. And if you look at a mighty oak, you might think that's an amazing tree, it's an amazing plant, etc., etc. But ultimately, it looks a bit dead. It's not really doing very much. But the micro level, it's a very, very busy thing, isn't it?
It's an amazing thing, an oak tree, and I happen to know the gentleman you're talking about.
Ah, do you? This is the artist Alex Metcalf.
Alex Metcalf. He's a product designer is his official title, I believe, and he has produced a microphone that is extremely sensitive. He places it up directly against the bark of large trees,
right,
and you can hear the sort of pops and whistles of water moving through the inside of that tree.
Because in a big tree, a huge amount of water is
really
being
large
moved.
volumes.
Do you know how much?
You know, we're talking hundreds of gallons, I think. In the course of a day, and particularly during the sort of real growing season when we've got lots of leaves on the trees,
yes,
and the process of transpiration is happening, which is drawing water from the roots upwards and out to the atmosphere.
Wow.
And that movement of water goes through tiny structures that are called xylem vessels. And these xylem vessels are tubes that allow the movement of water through the plant. And they're about the width of a human hair.
So lots of those.
And what was
being drawn
What would
up?
be amazing, Ed, I know we haven't got long on air, but there may well be listeners out there who met Alex when we first brought him to Norfolk, because Teacher Scientist Network brought him to Norfolk for a schools event, Fascination of Plants, probably about 6 years ago.
Okay.
And there might even be someone who
them.
went to school, went to Fascination of Plants Day, is now in the workplace and listening to Radio Norfolk. Can they remember, it's a bit obscure, but can they remember Fascination of Plants Day and the tree listener at the John Innes Centre?
Isn't it infectious? Can you hear the passion in Dr. Phil Smith's voice? This is why we've whet your appetite here. If you can listen to trees, what else can you do with plants? How fascinating they are. We're going to delve in to the world of plants very, very shortly. Let's get some travel on next. 11:26 BBC Radio Norfolk, and we're talking plant science this morning with Dr. Phil Smith because of this man. You might have seen it in the newspapers, a British man who is enabling people to listen to the insides of trees. And I wanted to find out a little bit more about plant science because we see them every day, and unless you're a keen gardener, you might just think, oh, well, that looks like a pretty flower, but not think anything more about it. So Dr. Phil Smith, and this is his specialist from the Teacher Scientist Network in Norwich. Now, when we were doing our research, you said you wanted to talk a little bit, Phil, about being a plant doctor. Are there any similarities with a plant doctor to that of our GPs and our doctors in the hospitals?
Yeah, exactly. There's lots, and that's why we use that analogy, because we're trying to make plant science feel a bit more accessible for people. So when you're poorly, you go to the doctor. Did you realise plants could get sick? This is some of the lines I've been using up at Hull Science Festival just this weekend, actually, with lots of families and children. So usually most people don't realise that plants get sick. But if we take that analogy a step further, what do you do when you go to the doctor? He examines you.
Yes.
He looks for symptoms.
Yes.
He uses clues in terms of, how's your skin reacting? Has it got blotches on it or spots? Have you got a high temperature? He's looking for clues to help him identify what the disease is. And the mechanism that plant doctors or scientists who work with diseases of plants are using is that exactly that same thing. So if the first thing you do when you look at a plant, what colour's a healthy plant, Ed?
I'm hoping it's green.
It is, yeah. So we start with the green plant, and then we're looking for something that isn't green on that plant.
So it might be a spot on the leaf or something like that.
Okay, I'm going to pass you tray number 1.
Look at this. So we've got a tray here, and on it I've got some oak leaves, hopefully. Are these oak leaves?
They're
yes?
not. No, they're sycamore.
Sycamore trees. Oh, that's a good start, isn't it? So I've got some sycamore trees here, and each of them look like they've got massive mole spots on them, really. And right, they're green, but a bit patchy, and right in the middle there is a dark black spot. They don't look like healthy sycamore leaves by any means.
And actually, they're from any sycamore around the county at the moment probably has these on them.
And
they're not that damaging to the tree, fortunately. It's well, again, this is an interesting thing about plant doctors. They're not very original when it comes to naming these things.
So is that called the black spot disease?
Very close.
Oh, no.
If that black spot sort of resembled something you're familiar with, think roads.
Oh, tar.
Exactly.
Oh, I see.
It's tar spot of sycamore.
Very good.
It also affects maple as well.
Does what it says on the tin there as well.
So here we are looking at symptoms of common diseases that are in trees, and they're in hedgerows. Now, you mentioned oak before.
Yes, I did. Yes. Oh, yes, sorry.
So that's tray 2.
Classic oak leaves here. And these look like they've got like a grey dust, almost like a fungus or a mould going on them there, with slightly brown spots. And then other leaves here where they're yellow with more of those sort of tar spots, but instead this is more like a pattern that's going up right up the sort of veins of those leaves here. Another plant that doesn't look very healthy at all. Then.
Exactly, and that's brilliant, Ed. You've just used the phrases yellowing, browning. We haven't seen curling or mottling, and we've got some growth on the surface, which is typically white or grey. All those different symptoms are clues to different diseases.
Right, okay.
So we've got powdery mildew here on the oak leaves, and the rose leaves that you were looking at. They start off with lots of little black spots. Those black spots develop, the plant gets sicker, more stressed, and they turn yellow and brown.
Okay, so how can we use it? Let's face it, we're going to have a lot of gardeners listening, and they may struggle to identify diseases like that, but also they must be threats. We're in a rural county, we've had ash dieback. These are potentially big problems. So what is being done behind the scenes to try and counteract these problems?
So we've got this very accessible route into actually spotting them, in that the symptoms give us lots of clues, and you can even very quickly Google things like mildew if you know the plant that you're dealing with, and the gardeners certainly will.
Yes.
So if you've got something that looks a bit mildewy and you're dealing with pumpkins, put mildew of pumpkin in, see if that's a disease. Chances are it is, and then they'll give you some information. It's a problem potentially in September, October when the leaves are big. Highly likely, therefore, that you've got mildew of pumpkin at this time of year.
Okay.
And it's that process of elimination that the public can use. Then scientists are obviously looking deeper into the plant and trying to understand why these symptoms are occurring. And it's interesting that you started the piece with us talking about, or getting me to talk about, the xylem vessels in an oak tree. Well, there is a bacterial threat out there called Xylella fastidiosa, which actually blocks the xylem vessels in a wide variety of plants.
So they can't draw up water and nutrients from the ground, presumably.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then it effectively dries up and the leaves take on a scorched appearance. And Xylella is a real concern to us here in Britain at the moment. We don't have it in Britain, and we don't want it in Britain. It's got a very, very wide host range, which means it will occur on lots of different plants.
So it could spread quite easily if it comes here. Is
exactly,
that
yeah. It's not very... And you get lots of plants which are called symptomless reservoirs. In other words, the disease is present in the plant, but it's showing no symptoms. So then how do you control it? How do you eliminate it if you don't know it's there?
And especially if they're coming over the border, into the country, over the borders, no one's going to spot it at all, are they?
And so you've got scientists who are having a role as researchers, like the people you've met before at John Innes Centre and the Sainsbury Lab, where they do lots of work on a wide range of UK and worldwide important plant diseases. But you've also got another set of trained plant doctors who work at the ports and the airports, trained to actually spot these things and hopefully prevent them coming into the country.
I mean, are we as hot on it as I was lucky enough to go to New Zealand 10 years ago, and they're really hot on things coming in and out of the country, from seeds to fruit to plants. In fact, I had a sniffer dog come and get my bag, and I thought, oh no, someone's planted something that shouldn't be in there. It turned out I'd left an apple in there, and they're really hot on it. And I wonder if it's the same thing here, that are we as protective of our biome here in the UK, watching out for diseases that could really threaten not just trees and things, but crops and things that we are relying on heavily here.
Well, I think we very much need to be more diligent than we actually are. I think we've got growing threats. So the likes of Xylella, which is a bacterial disease, it's very difficult to spot. But if it does get here, as it's got from the Americas over to Europe, it got into Italy, and it's really devastating olive production in Italy. And it's now gone very quickly from thinking it's in Italy in 2013. It then went to Corsica in 2015, got to the Balearics by 2016. These things move really quickly.
Yes.
And we have international trade now, of course we do. And it's so easy for these things to be transmitted on your foot or in products, like you were indicating, taking products from one part of the world to another. So we do have to be really stringent about what we let in terms of the food and agricultural products that we deal with. This was where Ash dieback came from originally.
And that's now spread, and of course it's a problem even we have it here in Norfolk.
Well, the first outbreak in Britain was detected in Norfolk on the outskirts of Wymondham.
Okay. Well, this is why we need our plant doctors. And Dr. Phil Smith, you know about plant biology, and we will be finding out more about plant scientists, getting inside the plants as well, because to the right of me here, I do have a microscope. It'll be the first time I've used a microscope on air. I know this is radio, but trust me, it will work. Let's get a song on at the moment. Here's Estelle. Estelle, American Boy, BBC Radio Norfolk. After midday, it's going to be the lunchtime takeover. Don't forget, this is where you can choose the music that I play between 12 and 1 o'clock. We'll have the theme along very shortly, and then we'll get you to choose the music. After 1 o'clock, it is, of course, that man, Stephen Bumphrey, top broadcaster, and One Foot in the Groove takes you back to 1989 and 1998. After 3, Colin Stafford Johnson invites you to take a walk on the wild side in Kings Lynn. And it's all looking up for high flyers at Norwich's Oak Circus Centre. We'll be hearing a little bit more about that in just a moment. But for the time being, we have got our resident Norfolk scientist, Dr. Phil Smith, in from the Teacher Scientist Network in Norwich. And his role is all about making science more accessible. That's why we get him on, because he's so passionate about it, gets us excited about all sorts of topics. And this morning, it's about plant scientists, which is an area that you're very comfortable on, because that is your specialism, isn't it? And you've lined up some experiments for us this morning, and I think we need to kind of see what's going on inside plants, see plants close up. So what have you got for us,
Okay,
Phil?
So we're going to start off with a sample of barley powdery mildew.
Okay.
So very important crop, barley and wheat.
Yes.
Really interesting story with barley and wheat mildew. Barley plants cannot be infected by wheat mildew. Mm-hmm. Wheat plants cannot be infected by barley mildew. But if I give you a wheat leaf and a barley leaf, both infected with mildew, I defy you to tell me the difference between the two.
Okay, so this is good. So these are tiny little dishes with tiny little leaves on. And yes, especially if you're, firstly, the leaves are quite similar, and then the mildew are in little clusters, tiny little spots, and there's only a slight difference in the shade of colour. But if you're looking closely, hardly at all. Oh, thank you. You've got a magnifying glass here as well. So bear with me, listeners. And then looking a little bit closer, when you look closer, it is a little bit...
It's white, grey, fluffy stuff, really,
exactly.
Isn't it?
Thank you for the science bit on that one. I like that.
But actually, what's happening, that disease, I'm fascinated by mildew. It's the first... Whether it... Sorry.
Producer Debs has just wrinkled her face with that. Dr. Phil Smith, you're fascinated by mildew. Why are you fascinated by mildew?
Partly, I think, because it was the first organism I worked on in any detail when I after my degree, and I don't know. It's just really a very clever thing. So it's got a tiny spore. The spore is about 10 microns in length. So sorry, science term, but unavoidable.
Yes.
We can have about 100. Where are we? A micron is 1,000th of a millimetre. Okay?
Yes.
So 10 microns, if we had 100 of these spores lined up in a line, that would be about a millimetre.
Oh my, so tiny.
Tiny spore. It lands on a fresh green leaf that's nice and healthy. first it's got to work out how to stick on there, which it does very efficiently. And then it produces a tiny little germ tube which just attaches to the plant, and it sort of anchors it in place.
Right.
There's been it's produced a sort of residue before that which has stuck it down, and this tube is a second way of making sure it stays there. And then it produces a second tube which extends out, and you can't see any of that with the hand lens, Ed. We have to go to the microscope, and we have to actually have removed all the green stuff, the chlorophyll, from the plant and stained the fungus to do that, and we just can't do that on air,
to see up close.
So hopefully my description is enough for people to visualise what's going on. You've got this structure that's attached to the plant. It produces a tiny little pin that goes into the top layer of cells, and with that pin it then forms a feeding structure inside the plant. So if it's reliant on the plant for food, it can't kill it. That's what's so clever about this thing. It has to strike a balance.
Yes.
So everyone thinks, it's just grey, white, fluffy stuff, which it is in appearance, but it's maintaining a really careful relationship with the plant, and it's clearly talking to the plant in some way. There is some form of communication between chemicals produced by the fungus and those produced in the plant that is governing this response. And we're now getting to the level that scientists are trying to unpick the detail of these chemicals and how it is controlled genetically through the different pathways that operate both inside the plant and in the fungus as well.
Okay, now I understand, Dr. Phil Smith, why you're so passionate about mildew. Never thought you were going to say, should we come round to the microscope?
Let's go to the microscope and give you a closer look at it, because once that fungus is inside the plant, it then extends its growth through the plant and bursts through onto the surface to release its spores and continue to the next generation.
Lovely.
And that's what you're going to get to see under the microscope.
Luckily, we rehearsed this, and I've put a microscope in the corner with its own microphone, so I'm just going to pop over there. Right, here we go, and hopefully now you can hear me on this microphone by the microscope. Phil, you come in nice and close. We're going to have to be quite friendly on this one.
Okay, so we've got a microscope that's going to magnify to about 20 times, and you're going to look down the microscope, Ed, and hopefully what I'm hoping you'll see is chains of spores, which is the release mechanism that this fungus has to disperse itself around farmers' fields.
Okay, well, here we go. I've got to take my glasses off for this one, so I can just about see without my glasses. That's my headphones dropping, by the way. Here we go. I'm looking in. Oh, yes.
Okay, so I want you to look for something that looks a bit sort of cotton woolly, Ed.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I can see all the little strands, like, tiny little bits of fluff, but now I can see the individual strands on each one of those.
And they're made up of something that's sort of elliptical, eyeball shaped.
Oh, yes, I can see that now.
And if you use the little knob on the side there, just to adjust the focus very slightly for your eyes, because everybody's eyes are different, then hopefully you can see there's probably 6 or 8 of these spores all stuck together in this very fragile chain.
They're clumped together, and it's a bit like sort of candy floss in a way. Absolutely like that. And when you look up closely, when you look on the leaf, you just think, that's like a bit of white fluff. But when you see it close up, nature's fascinating, isn't it? These beautiful structures that are being constructed, and as you said, the relationship it has with the plant as well.
To get to this point, because that's why it's on this funny jelly stuff. We've got to keep the plant alive, because keeping the plant alive keeps the fungus alive in this case. There are some diseases which really just kill the plant tissue. They're called necrotrophs. Mildew is a biotroph, and it needs to establish this relationship with the plant that's far more subtle, and it needs to keep the plant alive.
Good stuff. Right, okay, round from the microphone then, back onto my mic. You see, even in this studio, we've got our own... Radio 2 doesn't have its own microscope in the studio, does it? Right, Dr. Phil Smith.
Right, okay, so that's powdery mildew, and you can see, you saw many hundreds, many thousands of these spores in chains on one single leaf. So very quickly you can see how an inoculum builds up and it spreads throughout the fields. And we even have science evidence that sometimes these spores travel great long distances. And we've got evidence that things have come from Denmark, from Germany, over to the east of England.
Oh my word. Yeah, so we're particularly quite vulnerable to that then, aren't we? Because we're the first line of defence.
Yeah, and it's not that far, it's not as long as travelling across the Atlantic and landing in the west of Britain. Now, I haven't done this with these leaves before, so this is fresh challenge for you, Ed.
That's what we like.
So we've got just some leaves of grass that I found in the garden this morning.
Okay, lovely. Oh no, not so lovely. These bits of grass, I've got lots of tiny brown spots on them. It looks like it's got grass acne. In
Perfect
a way.
description. Have you still got the hand lens there, Ed?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so you might like to...
Okay, this is good for radio, but I'm going to try my best to describe these things here.
And so the plant looks quite... It's not looking green and healthy. It's got these sort of pustules on. It's a bit like chicken pox, I guess.
Yeah, and there are hundreds of those little brown dots all over each blade of grass on here. So what's going on there then?
I'm going to pass you, and before I tell you, I'm going to pass you that cotton bud.
Okay.
We've made that cotton bud wet. I want you to stroke it across the leaves, please, Ed.
Okay. Oh.
Hold on to a leaf and just keep stroking back and forth. Doesn't matter if you damage them.
Oh, now.
And I'm hoping against hope.
A load of it is going away. It's clearing.
And what's happening to the cotton bud?
The cotton bud is sort of going a bit of a funny brownie sort of colour.
Okay, so what you're being able to do there is those structures that you were describing, they're packed full of spores. It's a pustule that's full of thousands and thousands of spores. Ooh. And the cotton bud has wiped those spores off the surface and they're now on the cotton bud.
Okay.
And this looks like a sort of brown rust disease.
Yes,
brown rust is a really common problem in cereals, particularly in the east of England when it's been a warm summer.
Mm-hmm. Which we've had. And there are some instances where the wild grasses that are at the side of the fields act as an overwintering source, because, of course, the wheat has now been harvested and there's nothing left in the field. It's fallow. But there is evidence in some interactions that the wild grasses act as this reservoir of spores to reinfect the next season, and people don't always look very closely in the hedgerows or at the side of fields, and there might be diseases festering there. And these pustules could be kind of lurking there.
Yeah, and they'll make sort of resistant structures that will enable them to survive over the winter. Then the crop will go in the ground, fresh young tissue is available when it germinates and comes through.
And the pustules then appear again.
Yeah, exactly. They get a head start from the infection that's in the ground.
Oh dear. Do I need to worry that I've now got some pustules on the end of a cotton wool bud?
No, plant diseases do not infect humans.
Good.
And just likewise, human diseases don't infect plants.
No, thank you. You get enough infections from these old faders here in Studio 2, let alone giving myself my own set of pustules as well. So, right, that's some of the experiments. Time has beaten us once again, Dr. Phil Smith. But one of your big jobs, of course, is engaging the next generation, isn't it, in science? And I've probably, in fact, now I've done the experiments very unfairly. I've been saying this morning of plant science on the surface, it's not that, it's not exactly playing with Bunsen burners. However, when you start looking at the microscope, when you see these things, when you start getting your magnifying glass out, that's when it becomes really exciting. So what are you doing to try and encourage that next generation?
Yeah, so I've just come back from Hull Science Festival. We spoke to literally thousands of people as outreach officer for the British Society for Plant Pathology. And we're all about helping the public in general, but particularly young people, learn more about these things and realise just how important they are. They can get hands-on with microscopes and hand lenses, which is one way to engage. But at the same time, you can have really meaningful conversations with people and think about, well, just how are we going to feed a growing population? There's no doubt that the world's population is growing quite considerably. It's going to be at 9 billion people by 2050. We need to roughly double food production. How are we going to do that? Yeah. We don't have any more agricultural land available to us. If anything, that's shrinking, particularly across the world, let alone in Britain. And as a result of that, we've got to be more efficient with the land that we do have. And plant diseases are a major constraint on yield. So the major cereal crops of this world, so the rice, the wheat, barley and maize, they're all really badly affected by plant diseases. It can constrain yields by somewhere between 10 and 30% year on year. And we've got to enable our scientists and inspire young people to think about careers in plant science so that they can be tackling these challenges in the future.
And clearly this is going to be the forefront of science for the century and beyond. Dr. Phil Smith, I'm so sorry to run out of time on this one, especially as we get to play with microscopes as well. Now, Dr. Phil Smith from the Teacher Scientists Network in Norwich, a passionate about science. That's why we have you in. Thank you ever so much. And we will catch up with you before Christmas because we've got the Norwich Science Festival coming up as well.
Well, that's just around the corner when we hope to inspire some some more young plant doctors and scientists in general, and hopefully we'll come in and chat then.
And we all love mildew. Thank you ever so much.
Edd Smith on BBC Radio Norfolk.